all to a new week of Celebrating CX, where we're welcoming inspiring people from inspiring brands to celebrate the work that they do. We're super happy this week to welcome Jelena Golubovic, who's going to talk all about a product perspective of what it means to deliver great CX this week with us. So thanks so much, Jelena, for joining us. Really curious to hear all that it is you're going to share today. And as always, at the end, we will have some dedicated time for a Q&A session. So just a bit of a housekeeping announcement before we kick off and I hand over. Please keep yourself muted for the duration of the talk. And if you have any questions or comments or things that you would like to share with us, please put it in the Zoom chat and we will dedicate some time at the end to go through it. Before I hand over, I will also introduce myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Barbara. I am part of the Made For team who is hosting these chats, a customer experience learning organization. So we're always happy to hear about best practices in the field. Jelena, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to be talking to you today. I'm going to share my screen. If you're comfortable, please turn on your camera. It kind of makes it a bit more real for me. Let's get started. First of all, the reason why I wanted to talk about this is I have been a product manager for a couple of years, but I have been a UX practitioner before that. So I know, as many of you probably know, that great CX does not just happen. It's very, very painstakingly created, deliberately, purposefully. So let's talk a bit about what it means to do that when you're managing a product. So first up, I'm going to introduce what I do and the company I work for. And then we're going to talk about certain steps that have worked in my context, just to see if something like that could help you as well. I'm going to finish off with main takeaways, and then it's going to be question time. So let's get started. First up, who I am. I am a linguist. I studied languages, believe it or not. Then I did a PhD in linguistics. And then I realized I did not really want to stay in academia for the duration of my career. So I became a UX researcher. I did that for a couple of years. And then I realized, okay, handing off insights is great. I wish I had some control over what happens to those, and some, power to actually make things happen. So that's how I became a product manager. And I love talking about product discovery because that's something that's very often overlooked. And my topic at Mendix is collaboration. I'm going to tell you a bit more about what that means. But first off, what the hell is Mendix? So Mendix is a low-code platform. And low-code is a way to develop applications without using a lot of code. You can use custom code, but it's a very visual way of developing things. So if you are a professional developer, tools like Mendix make you faster, simply because a lot of the boring, repetitive work you have to do as a developer is kind of figured out for you. And if you're someone like me who doesn't have a technical background, citizen developer, as they like to call them in the field, you can also create an app. So it literally takes about a couple of minutes to create a blank app or an app based on a template that's going to be running in the cloud already. So it's all about doing the development in a visual way. And Mendix supports that whole process. So we have tools for capturing user stories. We have studios for actual visual development. You can deploy to the cloud of your choice. And then we also have feedback tools that help you iterate. Now, just to give you an idea of how all of this looks like, if you were using Mendix, you might see something like this. And this is the whole idea behind it. It helps business and IT collaborate because this is how you develop in Mendix, and this is very human readable, right? So you can see what's happening here. You enter your passwords twice. If they match, that's fine. If they don't match, you might get some sort of an error message. Simple, right? What I do is take care of this cycle. So how do you ideate? How do you plan your work? And how do you iterate and monitor based on the feedback? So my product portfolio has to do with developing and improving on those tools within Mendix. So let's start with the first section, but first I want to ask you guys a question. Barbara is going to start the poll now, and I'm really curious to see what you're going to answer. So how often do you feel like you have a really good understanding of the problem before exploring solutions? I'm talking about my product and UX people, but even if you're in a different CX field like customer service, how often does it happen to you that you feel like you really have a good grasp of the problem before you decide on the solution? Did everyone have the chance to respond?
We're missing one, so just give a couple of moments, and otherwise I'm going to end the poll.
Okay. Okay, so a good sign is nobody said almost never, and somebody said almost always. That's good. So we're somewhere in the middle, 20 to 60% of the time. That's pretty good. I have to say, in my organization, we have gotten better at this over time. So now we really always or almost always consider this. But the point I'm trying to make here is this. Larry Marin is UX veteran. He's been doing this for, I think, more than 30 years. So if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. This is his quote I love and I try to live by. So if you don't accurately define the problem, you might end up solving the wrong problem very well. What that means is, and I'm using a framework from another PM influencer, Tim Herbig, there is a problem space and there is a solution space. So in product management, very often the question is this a problem worth solving at all? Like the most basic question to ask. But let's assume that it is worth solving. What is worth solving exactly? So before you dive into it, you need to understand what is the problem exactly? Who is it the problem for? What is the context of these people? How are they currently solving the problem? How you could make their lives better, all sorts of things. And I'm going to give you an example of how it went down with us. So one of the products that I'm in charge of is a Mendix collaboration tool. And this is what it used to look like. This is what it still looks like. So this is where people using Mendix can use this tool to create their user stories, manage their sprints, etc. So what happened was that some things changed. There were some missing features, right? We haven't been really updating this tool. Our market has changed. So back in the day, we had to convince people that low code is actually valuable and it makes sense. Now that's easier. But the companies that start using Mendix are very often well-versed in Agile, which wasn't the case before. So they have their own processes and tools. But also our current customers, their needs have changed because they've been scaling up. And it's not the same to do this with 3 apps and with 103 apps. So these are the questions, just as an example to start from. Always make sure to explore your problem space, because it's natural for me as a PM as well to jump into solutions immediately. And that's okay. You know, come up with a solution, park it somewhere, make a note of it. It might be useful later, but continue exploring that problem space until you really feel comfortable in it. This was the problem space for Mendix Stories. Apart from the bigger things, let's focus on feature level. It only had 3 lanes to do doing and done, not customizable enough. There were some drag and drop issues. It didn't have epics, which became the norm, and it didn't have enough formatting options. So those are all of the things we discovered when we conducted generative research. This is roughly what our process looked like, but I'm going to take you through all of this in a bit more detail. Let's say we have identified the problem. We know exactly what's wrong with things now. So we started creating wireframes. And Comic Sans is here for a reason. This gives people the idea that this really is a wireframe, right? This is just a rough sketch. You shouldn't have big expectations from it. So we did that. And then we went to solution definition. This is in part already a solution definition. You take your best guess based on what you know, and then you validate. So once you know what the most valuable problems to solve are, all the things you've gathered in your problem space, you can use in your solution space. What's the ideal solution? How can we slice it? What can we do? And this initial prototype validation really helped us kind of streamline and understand how to prioritize things. So this is where we get to, what does this new product, kind of like the next generation of our tool for managing stories, what does it absolutely have to have? What do we want it to have? What would be cool to have? And then we started grouping those things. And these were the basics of our high-level epics, or of our big features. So basically, with all of this, because we explored the problem space so well, the decisions we had to make here were much easier to make. It was much easier for me to have information to base my decisions on. Just to give you an idea of what the value of the prototype is, once you show this to people, product decisions become much easier. This makes sense. How many assignees you need to have per story? Just one, because people told you that. There is a trade-off to be made here between showing a lot of relevant info here, but not being very cluttered, because you still want to fit a lot of things here that users can see at a glance. So smaller product decisions also become a bit more crystallized. And this is what the final design looked like. So every single step we made here has led us closer to this. And our designer actually said, because we did our homework in the beginning, her job has never been easier, because when she had to make design decisions, she had something to base those design decisions on. So prototyping, validating, building, I used to fall into that same trap. Let's just do stuff, let's build it, we don't have the time. This actually saves you time, because we realized that the focus we had with knowing what the right solution to every problem was meant that in 90% of cases, we were hitting right on the mark on our first go. And this is a very important thing that I was aware of from my user research days, but a lot of people aren't. You might think you know what your users need, but that's still just an assumption. And it could be a valid assumption. Some people really know what their users need, but ideally, before you consider it a fact, you should test it somehow. So just to give you an idea of how this evolved, this was our backlog page in the beginning. You have a backlog, you have your to-do lane. Once we started getting the hang of it, we realized we needed something a bit more complex. So our prototype evolved into something more like this. We realized that we needed to present this flow really well. You have stories in your backlog, then they get refined. Usually they get points, then you plan your next sprint, and then your active sprint is shown on top. And this is what made sense to a lot of people. Had we stayed here, it would have been okay, but it wouldn't really have hit the mark. And this is what the final design looked like. You get into pixel perfect designing once you are sure that the basic decisions are made already. And finally, process and people. So first up, good flow is essential. What this meant for us was that different parts of the product were developing at different paces. So we realized from our research, the most important thing, the thing everyone cared about, was the board, the Kanban board. So we did that one first. Backlog was next. The page with the epics overview was next. But what that meant was that first, we would just make it work. Then we would make it work a bit better and look a bit better, and then we would make it perfect. So at the same time, while this app was in development, we would have a pixel perfect board and a really shitty looking epics overview page, which is fine. That's the way it should be, right? So you need to get into this flow that's comfortable for the team, where you're constantly planning new things, figuring them out, building prototypes, validating, implementing, adding pixel perfect designs. And that's gonna develop at different paces. But the important thing is you're always going to feel like you're making progress, because progress in that way of working is really visible. The second thing that we've learned on this project is the importance of design development collaboration. And I can't stress this enough. So having a designer function as a part of the team is essential. And I know what you might be saying, maybe you don't have enough designers to go around. We don't either at this point. We still have more teams than we have UX designers. But if a designer is working on a project, it's really cool to have them get involved in the team rituals, be active in the team Slack, and then this creates things like this. I added this just to kind of anonymize it, but basically this is how good collaboration works. We were talking about adding a sprint goal here. You don't have to read through the whole thing. So a designer says that, okay, this takes up real estate. I have to sacrifice something else. This is what I came up with. Developers really like it. Okay, do we need a max number of characters? It's these quick alignments that actually make or break your product and that create a really good user experience. When a bunch of people are collaborating on figuring out the best solution, and you want to have your UX practitioners in the room for that as much as possible, of course, because often they're going to be juggling multiple projects. Another important thing was them being able to give feedback on the implementation of their designs, because what very often happens, designs are handed over and then that's it. It's really good to have another round of checking, hey, this is not the way I designed it. Could we do this like this? Or actually, I designed this like this, but maybe it could work better a different way. So small alignments, immensely valuable. And finally, this might sound a bit cheesy, but it really, really is true. You need happy people. And when I say happy people, I mean a well-functioning team in the sense that people are empowered to give their own opinion, whatever it might be. So as a product manager, what my role is about, it's about making decisions every single day. And if I make a decision, I might be wrong. So I want my team to feel empowered to tell me, hey, Jelena, but if you do things like this, have you thought about that? And very often I'm like, yeah, actually, I haven't thought about that. So you need every team member to feel empowered to share that. And, you know, just this team vibe of, you know, having fun doing something is immensely valuable. What this led to, for example, we've added a bunch of little Easter eggs in our product just because people were having fun with it so much and they were motivated to take it a step further and to create an even better, more delightful experience. This is not a must, but at the point when you feel like you've created a good CX, you can, if you have a well-functioning team, take it a step even further and create amazing CX. This is what kind of creates that type of a difference. So how do you know that this works? This was the feedback we got for our private beta. So I took this project as an example because it was by far the smoothest project I've ever been involved in as a PM. And the reason why all these people have felt their needs were met and they were listened to was because we actually did. All that groundwork we set in the beginning in exploring the problem space, all of that, first of all, created a lot more focus, made my job easier because decision-making was easier. I had data to base my decisions on. And ultimately, we were addressing their real concerns because we knew exactly what their real concerns were. So to sum up, how I think amazing CX is created from a product perspective is, first of all, figuring out your problem space. And I understand that we feel compelled to deliver and to get stuff done and to build things and to design things. But trust me, the time spent in this phase is never really wasted. It comes back with more focus and with less rework in the long run. Solutions. So this area actually helps you make decisions in the solution definition. It makes things a lot easier. Try to have a good flow between prototyping and validating before you build. And finally, don't underestimate the importance of good process and happy people. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Let me have a look at the questions in the chat, and then we can continue if you want to talk. So let's see.
Before we do that, thanks so much, Jelena. I really want to thank you, do a bit of a silent clap as we always do here during the lunch talks. Thanks so much for sharing. Maybe if you stop sharing your screen, then we can indeed dive into the chat and see what the questions are. Really inspirational ending as well. And as Agnes also says, happy employees is happy customers. And you've stressed that as well during your talk. So thanks for sharing. Let's go to the question. The first one as well is from Agnes. And the question is, how do you make sure that the problem you explore is customer-centric? Meaning, how do you make sure that the problem is about the outcome and not the output?
Okay, so first of all, short answer, you talk to those customers. Slightly longer answer, people don't use your product just to be using your product. People are using your product to achieve something. Your product is supposed to make them faster or more efficient or less error prone, or it's supposed to make their lives better. So the actual question you should be asking going into every one of those conversations is, how can we make your lives easier? And they will tell you for sure. I'm not saying you should take what they tell you at face value, because often they would be providing solutions of their own, which aren't the best solutions to the problem, but then you can dig a bit deeper and understand why. If they say, I want X, okay, why do you want it? Oh, I wanted to be able to do Y. Well, maybe Y is better done with something totally different that they haven't thought of, but make sure you really listen. And in that case, it's never going to be about the output. It's always going to be about the outcome for that customer. Then your goal becomes, we want to help people do X. And then you can go into your solution definition after you've accurately defined the problem. I hope that answers the question. Happy employees, happy customers. Yes. Can we share some of those Easter eggs? Yeah, for example, I don't know how familiar you are with well, general software project management tools like Jira, but you are. Okay, so
I see some faces also in here that I think are quite familiar. Yeah, so give it a
go. So you, for example, you create user stories, and at some point you point them. And it usually follows the Fibonacci sequence, right? 1, 3, 5, etc. Usually it can go up to 100. So if you try to, one of the Easter eggs we put is if you type in 100 or something bigger than that, we ask something like, I can't remember the exact company, but something like, are you sure you want to do this? And if you say yes, you get this meme, challenge accepted. So, you know, cute little things like that. We were also thinking about adding some confetti when you move a story to done, just as a little delighters. So it's people who are really excited and motivated about what they're doing. They're going to come up with those little stuff. And I'm not just talking about delighters, which are cherry on top. I'm also talking about tiny little ways you could tweak the product to make it even better, which comes after you actually build your first version.
Exactly. I like that as well, that you said that it's not only about indeed then delivering the delight, but also to steer people maybe a bit into the different direction with challenging their thinking, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, let's reconsider. Thank you so much for sharing. If there are any more questions, please pop them in the chat. I had one more as well, so I'm happy to ask that one in the meantime. So you talked about the design, development, collaboration, and how valuable that was to have those regular check-ins and to involve them like quite often. Did you also like, how did then the intentional planned comms look like? Because in product teams you have your ceremonies if you work with Scrum, for example, and yeah, quite often your rigid set of meetings that is planned. Like, how do you intentionally go about then including designers as well? How did that look like?
Yeah, so the way it worked with us was for this specific team, there was one designer working on it, and they were invited to all the rituals. And they were given the freedom to join whenever they could, because we still have designers juggling multiple projects at the time. So we had to be realistic, right? If they were joining every single ritual of every single team they support, they would hardly be left any time to design. So occasionally they join stand-ups. And this is usually when they're actively working on the design. So this is when those quick alignments happen. They were joining retros, which was really fun. With design, I think the way it worked is that we had periods of very high involvement from the designer when things were happening. And then we had like a drop off when the team was busy implementing all of that. So then the designer would be busy working on something else, and then they would come back, do that round of checking if everything is right. One important thing was that the designer was a part of the Slack channel, and if anyone needed their opinion, they would just mention them with no expectation of them responding right away, but we kind of had a good flow going. And this is what created these quick alignments that I find really valuable. So give them all the freedom, invite them to everything, but then let them say no when they're not available, I would say is the best way to go. Unless, of course, you're in the luxury position of having a dedicated designer to the team, in which case they would probably be involved in everything by default.
That makes sense. Thanks so much for sharing.
Hey. Yeah, I had one more quick one, maybe in the last minute. Sorry, Boris. So you mentioned about the customer research as a part of your problem discovery process, and that would that be a product team that actually does that research in Mendix?
It would be both, actually. We do have user researchers and service designers. Designers themselves are often involved in research if they know they would be working on the project. So it can be a full-blown generative project by the UX team. But we also tend to combine things and share information. In my role as a product manager, I tend to talk to customers all the time. And if they do have a problem, it's my job to talk to them about it in the sense of how can we go about this? Do we have something on the roadmap? So those types of conversations can be a part of the discovery process if you use them right. And another thing we do at Mendix that I think works great is something we call a customer validation carousel. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what it really means is that every month we invite 5 users and we prepare 5 topics inside the company. So there is a person that organizes that. And it's kind of like speed dating. You have 15 minutes per topic. So then people don't spend longer than a half an hour with us. So at any point in time, there is somebody from the product team for 15 minutes in a room with each of the customers, and they keep switching. See what I mean? Kind of like speed dating, but for research. So we found that for these quick validations, 15 minutes is tight, but it's enough if you focus them right. And it's really good for getting a hang of, okay, how should this work exactly? And this is what we did when we showed like a quick prototype just to get people's feedback on it.
Thank you. Sounds really good.
All right, then we're already over time. Thanks so much, Jelena, for sharing the insights and answering all our questions. And thanks everyone else for joining in. The last thing that rests me to do is to launch a quick poll to ask about your experience of today. Please, before you leave today's talk, make sure to fill it out. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. And thank you so much, Jelena, for making the time to host today's session, and wishing you all a very good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.